Good morning. I hate to interrupt all of the great conversations going on in this room. I was standing and looking at all the tables and all the engagement going on, and I suspect a lot of problems are being solved before we even get started. So, good morning. My name is Chris LaMothe. I have the pleasure of serving this year as the chair of the Commission for Higher Education, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me not only to work with our remarkable commissioner for higher education, Teresa Lovers, but her really phenomenal staff who have put together what I think is going to be a really exciting day ahead of us. How is everyone this morning? I mean, is this not a beautiful day today? I don't know about you, but I am really ready for spring. So anyway, I want to welcome you all to the 2019 H. Kent Weldon Conference. This annual event serves as an opportunity for all members of the community, from educators to policymakers and employers, to come together and discuss the most important topics in higher education. As I look around the room, I'm encouraged to see education professionals who are often on the front line and working directly with students in multiple capacity. I would tell you, I feel there are precious few things more important than the work we are all engaged in, this work of education, in particular, this high school and transition into higher education. It's critical. Today, the discussion I just lost my spot. In supporting Hoosier students as they make that transition from high school to their careers is really critically important, and it's really become even more critically important than it's been in the decades in the past. When I'm not serving on the Commission for Higher Education, I'm CEO of Elevate Ventures, and I see it's interesting because I'm operating at where entrepreneurism and innovation is just beginning to take off, and I'm looking at what the needs are of these employers, these new budding new company employers, and the gap there is between what their needs are and what is often coming out of the higher education system and high schools. And I'll make a comment about that in just a moment. Before we get started, I wanted to spend a few minutes sharing a little bit about our big goals at the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. So at the Commission, our focus is on Hoosier students and finding the best ways to serve them as they pursue education beyond high school. As you know, our state's big goal is to see 60% of Hoosiers completing education beyond high school by 2025. 60%. Today, we're at 43.4%. That is a significant gap, and about 5.5 years to close that gap. We have a lot of work to do. In 2013, the Commission also passed a resolution to cut the state's achievement gap for low-income and minority students by half by 2018 and close it completely by 2025. This summer, we released our 2018 College Equity Report, which shows that Indiana is making significant progress in closing the achievement gap, and we have officially accomplished our first goal in cutting that gap in half. While we celebrate this milestone, it is now more important than ever to continue the positive momentum. We still have a ways to go if we want to completely close that achievement gap by 2025. We must all work together to achieve such a big goal. In addition, we've been focusing on post-secondary transitions in an attempt to smooth the transition from high school to higher education. And we should all be thinking about what lies ahead at the end of a student's high school career, whether it's to obtain an industry-aligned certificate or an associate or bachelor's degree or even beyond. The Commission's work the Commission is working more closely with our K-12 partners to improve preparation and smooth college and career transition. This work is the foundation for student success in life and moving on to some level of higher education degree as they move on or move out or onto the higher education platform. Last evening during Indiana State Higher Education Address, Commissioner LaMothe shared some information about the Indiana Post-Secondary Transitions Steering Committee. And I want to reiterate a couple of items that she had mentioned. One, the committee is composed of 15 K-12 and higher education leaders and established a set of recommendations, I might add unanimously, supported by the Commission for Higher Education and the State Board of Education. And specifically, some of those items were to develop and scale post-secondary transitions pathways, beginning with 12th grade math course that ensures more students are college ready. Promote navigational support and activities for all students, such as those that are required and improving success rates of 21st century scholars, and expand the use of key post-secondary transitions data to facilitate cross-sector collaboration. We know that success in higher education begins in high school and even earlier. These joint strategies and shared dialogue between K-12 and post-secondary partners, like the ones we're about to have today, will improve post-secondary preparation and student success. The future of our work in our state is changing. There is a greater need now for training beyond high school at every level than ever before. But we must ensure students are prepared to take that next step. I remember 20 years ago, and yes, I am that old, 20 years ago, the cry that a high school degree was not enough for the jobs of tomorrow. Friends, as I look around this room, that day is here. Many of the jobs high school graduates could go to in the past are either gone or they're very rapidly disappearing. And so there's a lot of kids that are graduating high school without hope, without a place to go, without the skills necessary for the jobs today. And business and government today have more jobs available than they can fill. Many companies, many in my own portfolio, have positions that they just cannot fill. So the jobs are there. We just don't have the people prepared to do those jobs today. So there's a lot of work for us to do in the years to come. Commissioner Lubbers and her really excellent team have planned an exciting agenda for you today, bringing together both Hoosier and national perspectives on best practices for supporting that transition between high school and higher education. Now I have the honor of introducing today's keynote speaker, Matt Gandal. Matt founded Education Strategy Group in 2012 to support states, national organizations, and foundations committed to dramatically improving the capacity and performance of the U.S. education system. Before founding ESG, Matt served as a senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, where he led a new division responsible for providing policy and implementation support to states. Before joining the department, Matt was Executive Vice President of Achieve, the national organization formed by governors and business leaders to help states raise educational standards. He helped found that organization and was responsible for overseeing its major initiatives, including advancing college and career readiness policies, promoting the adoption of more rigorous academic standards, and establishing the National Education Summit, or summits, that brought together governors, CEOs, and education leaders from across the country to commit to ambitious reforms. Matt has over 20 years of experience leading policy development, advocacy, and implementation work in both K-12 and the higher education sectors. And we could not be more thrilled, Matt, that you are here with us today. Please join me in welcoming founder and president of Education Strategy Group, Matt Gandal.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for the warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Did you stay up late watching basketball? Yeah, I got in time to see the game. I have to say there's no better place to watch March Madness than here. I'm sorry you guys didn't have one of your institutions in the finals, but I was thinking about you, and it certainly was an exciting tournament, so I was glad I could get here in time for it. I'm really thrilled to have been invited to address you this morning. I've been to Indiana many times in my career, from the early part of my career till now. I've always viewed Indiana as a place where people are very, very serious about the quality of education at all levels, and frankly, there's an appetite to look outside your borders for what's working elsewhere and help that inform what you're doing right here in the state, and I think that is a really, really important characteristic and quality. So I hope you'll indulge me a little bit today as I tell you about some of what we're seeing elsewhere around the country in order to inform the next stage of your work. The commission that Commissioner Lovers leads and the staff there and the board, just I can't say enough about the leadership that you have in this state for your state system of higher education. I spent a lot of time in a lot of states, meeting with a lot of leaders, and you have the best. I can tell you, the most highly respected team around the country. There's a lot of folks who want to learn from your commissioner and the team that's been built and from your institutional leaders because of the work you're doing. So hats off to you, but don't rest on your laurels because as we just heard, things are a-changing and they're changing fast. So I want to start with a little bit of economic data just to back up what Chris said a few minutes ago, just to give you a sense of how fast things are changing. I think it's not news to you in this room, but I think it's news to a lot of parents and legislators and others around your state and around the country, just how dramatically things have changed in the world when our young people and frankly our adults are out there trying to do well. The majority of jobs today really do require more than a high school diploma. In general, it used to be okay to have a high school diploma and go into the world of work. Today, it pretty much guarantees you nothing. This data point from Tony Carnevale's shop at Georgetown University, one of the top kind of think tanks on economic data and policy, shows you that since the last recession in 2009, pretty much all the jobs that have been created require education and training beyond high school. If you don't have that, you're really left out in this economy, and that's really important point. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir on this, but it's really important that the folks that you work with understand this, no matter what kind of community you live in. But just as important, this doesn't mean that all young people or adults need a 4-year degree to be successful. Nationally, this same Georgetown Center did an analysis of what they consider good jobs that pay enough to support a family and allow for upward mobility. And you can see that while 36 million require a BA or higher, 30 million are available with something less than a BA, usually an associate's degree or high-quality certificate. So it's not necessarily all about having a 4-year degree today. I think as Commissioner Lubbers even mentioned yesterday in her remarks, it's more about what you take and what kind of credential you get than it is the particular institution you attend or 4-year versus 2-year degree. There are many associate's degrees in certain fields, high demand fields that pay, if pay is one of your measures, that pay a lot more than a 4-year degree in certain other fields. And there are certain certificates that will earn you more than a bachelor's degree depending on the field of choice. So very important that we're focused on which fields and which types of credentials, not just a 4-year degree. This has led many states, over 40 states, to do what Indiana has done and set a goal for the percentage of the population that will have a post-secondary credential of some kind to try to keep pace with the economic demands. You're not alone in setting an ambitious goal. As I said, 40-plus states have done it. And as you see from this map, this shows you where we are as a national average in terms of attainment, 48%. We heard we're 43% for Indiana versus your 60% goal. I can tell you every state on this map has a goal that's set that has a pretty sizable gap right now. Most of those goals are for 2025. Some have been set out a little bit more at 2030. But you're part of a real movement that says to respond to this economic reality that we're in, we have to up our game in terms of post-secondary credential attainment, credentials of all kinds, 4-year, 2-year, high-value certificates. We have to organize around that, and I think it's exactly the right path to stay on here in Indiana. Important to look at nationally and in Indiana who's currently earning these credentials. I know you care a lot about leveling the playing field here in Indiana and serving all of your young people and your adults and giving them a fair chance. You're not alone in having this gap, but it's really notable that you have double the number of white people in the state with a credential of some kind, a 2-year or a 4-year credential, than you do, say, Hispanics. And I know you've seen some gains in recent years in terms of closing those gaps, but you, like the rest of the country, needs to double down on intentional strategies and policies to make sure those who can benefit the most from post-secondary credentials have access and are supported to get there. So I was really thrilled when Commissioner Lubbers told me that the theme of your conference this year was going to be strengthening partnerships between K-12 school systems and higher ed institutions. As you heard in the introduction, I've spent my whole career in the space of kind of breaking down the silos between the systems, whether it's K-12 and higher ed, or frankly, these days I'm spending a lot more time on breaking down those barriers between both K-12 and higher ed and the workforce needs, because that's what's most prevalent and on folks' minds. I don't know of any other way to say this other than no sector alone can close these gaps. Whether it's getting to your attainment goal or closing these equity gaps that I just described, it is really impossible for higher ed to do this on its own. It's impossible for K-12 to do this on its own. It really does require teamwork. And I was reminded of this recently. We were just talking about kids earlier, and I have a daughter in 9th grade who just made the track team at her high school. And I've been going to some track meets recently, which I hadn't spent a lot of time doing before. And I was watching the relay race, which I think is really a notable example of how things are done when you want to maintain momentum and allow for a smooth transition and handoff. And it's so different from what we do in our education system. So bear with me. For those who have watched relay races, whether it's a high school or an Olympic one, it's really no difference. The runner that is finishing one leg of the race doesn't slow down to hand off the baton. The runner that's starting the second leg of the race doesn't start from a dead stop. He or she is pretty much at a full sprint. The first person is sprinting to hand off that baton, trying to get to that next person who's sprinting to pick up the baton. No time is lost. There's no gap. In fact, that probably makes the difference between the winning and the losing team, is that handoff, more so than each leg of the race. Think about our education system for a minute. Think about what happens when young people finish high school and go to college. Think about the relay race. Imagine running a relay race and you finish the first leg and you completely stop, and the next person to give the baton to, frankly, isn't even within reach. Oftentimes, there's a whole summer in between, or a distance where you have to throw that baton to get to that next person, hope they catch it, and then that person starts running. We're not going to win any relay races that way. But that is the way we're doing education still today, as Chris said, after years and years of reform. And it's just notable to me. And I believe it is because we have systems that are unaligned, governed differently, with incentives that often drive them in opposite directions. We just haven't made it a priority. But it is eminently doable, I believe, if we make it a priority. It requires going the extra mile. Sorry for all the relay race notes here, but frankly, it also requires kind of getting out of our lanes. It's not enough just to stay in our lane and do our thing. It means getting in each other's lanes, breaking down silos, building partnerships, building mutually reinforcing incentives. If you're trustees or boards, if you're presidents or superintendents, it means prioritizing spending time with each other and building joint strategies. And if you're faculty or teachers, it means valuing just as much the work that you're doing in that next step or in that previous step and figuring out a way to build those partnerships and align those curricula and those programs. Not easy, but it is doable. So a few weeks ago, I was really thrilled to be part of launching a new national initiative to try to shine the spotlight on the importance of this called Level Up. And it was launched by a number of national organizations who all believe, as I do, that the only way we're going to win the race and break down those silos is if we're really intentional about it and focus on it from the national level all the way down. So a number of organizations that you can see here on the screen, national groups representing higher education, some of the leading higher education organizations in the country, some of the leading K-12 organizations in the country, some of the leading policy think tanks in the country, going all the way from the left to the right, and others joined together to say, we need to make this a bigger priority in the U.S. We need to support states and communities that are going to make this a priority. And we launched the Level Up Coalition. I'm thrilled to tell you that Commissioner Lubbers is one of the advisors. We have a National Advisory Council that was created that has leading institutional and system leaders from around the country, both in K-12 and higher education, as well as a few national leaders of organizations that represent these constituencies. And this group is going to guide the work of the coalition, which is essentially to shine the spotlight on what's working, be really clear about where it's not, and for states in particular, and also communities that want to try to do something different. There will also be some technical assistance and opportunities to support that work. So I'm really excited about Level Up. And I want to tell you a little bit about the framework that's guiding that work and kind of what the strategies are that we've seen working. Because as I said, this good work is happening here in Indiana and across the country. We've been looking for the best examples, and we've compiled it into a report and a framework. It's all available online. I have some of these reports up here at the front table, probably not enough for everyone, but I'm sure we can figure out how to get access if people are interested. I just want to take a few minutes to talk you through what I think are some of the high impact strategies that we're seeing to close these gaps, smooth these transitions, and make a smoother handoff. We've organized them into 3 types of actions: aligning expectations, facilitating seamless transitions, and extending navigational support. So I'm going to briefly explain each one. First one on the aligning expectations. We'll start with the problem we're trying to solve. The problem is not that young people don't want to or intend to go to college. The vast majority do when they're in high school. The vast majority of parents across ethnic groups, socioeconomic groups, want their children to go to college. The problem is that many of them are not ready when they leave high school, and you know what happens when they're not ready. Even if they do go to college, they end up in remedial courses, and while you all have done an incredible job dealing with that in Indiana, most of the country has not. And pretty much if you take a remedial course in the U.S., there's a good chance you're not going to ultimately earn a credential. The rates for community colleges, I think, are 1 in 10 students in America that goes into a remedial course freshman year will not earn a credential. That's astounding. So we have a kind of a gap between the aspirations and the preparation for young people in high school, and it takes intentional effort to close that gap, and it starts with expectations. So I just want to mention one state that we think is leading the way in the country on closing the expectations gap, and that's Tennessee. Like Indiana, Tennessee set a post-secondary goal, credential goal of they call it Drive to 55, 55% of young people and adults with credentials by, I think it was 2025, same year as your goal. But they have used that goal to bring everyone together in the state to make this a priority. It's not just the higher education system's goal. They have a number of higher education policy levers they've pulled, everything from Tennessee Promise that offers sort of free or low-cost community college to everyone in the state, for example, which you've probably heard about, and you have your own variation on that theme here in Indiana. They also put a very high-impact program in place in 12th grade for students who are not college-ready in math to take a transition course that was co-developed by the college system and the K-12 systems, and if you pass it, you're essentially put into credit-bearing courses when you arrive in all the community colleges in the state, and it's made a really big difference. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. But importantly, what I want to stress here is that Drive to 55 goal has become embedded in both K-12 and higher ed policy. So it's kind of a no-brainer that that's going to be a big part of what the higher ed community focuses on, because you're trying to increase attainment of post-secondary credentials. Well, that's post-secondary's job, right? In Tennessee, it's also K-12's job. So when they redid their accountability system for the K-12 schools, high school goals now incorporate college-ready measures. Things like dual enrollment and advanced course taking are now in the metrics for high school performance. If you increase the number of students who accomplish that and even earn a high-value industry-recognized credential in high school, your school gets more points. And they're emphasizing that more than they're emphasizing just graduation, for example. So it became a metric for high school performance in a way where both systems now kind of own this Drive to 55 goal. They're on pace to meet the goal, and they're the fastest improving K-12 system in the country in terms of academic performance. Now I want to mention a state that's just starting on this journey, but we happen to be doing a lot of work with the state of North Carolina. They were one of the states that did not have a goal, a post-secondary attainment goal, until recently, and they just last month announced a goal of getting 2 million by 2030, which essentially is about 66% of the population with post-secondary credential. This graphic I'm showing you here, if you see where they are today at 49%, if you follow that gray line across, that's if they keep doing everything they're doing now and they work really hard on the current reforms and the current policies and practices, they'll end up at about 54% of where they need to be, 54% of the 2 million goal. They have to get to 66%, that green line. So what they did in North Carolina in establishing this goal and working through all the data and all the different kind of formulations and strategies was they did it holistically. They had the K-12 system, the higher ed systems, both the UNC system, the community college system, the private institutions, the business community, and other nonprofits, all part of a commission that spent a year working through the implications and the data and coming up with this goal for the state. Took longer, but they have complete buy-in across all the sectors now for their goal, and it's going to be very interesting to watch to see how they do, because our hypothesis is that by taking the time and making it an inclusive goal, they may get further because all sectors will be working together to try to reach what in other states, and I'm not really referring here to Indiana, but in other states it's just thought of as a higher education attainment goal. So I just wanted to flag that because we hope to see many more states that are taking this on in a collective manner, making this a co-owned set of objectives. Pathways. Let me speak for a minute about pathways and what we're seeing in terms of really good work in that regard. I know Commissioner Lubbers yesterday mentioned, and I said earlier today, and so did Chris, how important it is to keep our eyes on the opportunities in the workplace and remind ourselves that at least one of the jobs of the education system, perhaps not the only one, but one of the jobs is to make sure when you earn that credential, when you walk across that stage, whichever it is, that has value in the marketplace and the workplace and allows you to build a fulfilling career with plenty of opportunity for upward mobility. Easier said than done, particularly when you think of institutions, frankly, whether it's K-12 schools or post-secondary institutions, and our kind of lack of ability to always be very nimble and seeing the data on the employer side. It's very hard to be poised to understand, first of all, what the opportunities are in the world of work, how fast they're changing, as Chris said, what the skills, competencies, and credentials are today or even tomorrow. They're going to open those doors. Not easy for us to do in the education sector. I just want to point to a state that's made that a really big priority and over the last few years made a lot of progress. That's another kind of neighboring state of Kentucky. Kentucky has made this a really big priority in both sectors. They have a very strong data system that allows them to look at the regional and state labor market needs and how they're going to evolve. And they essentially set a goal to say, at least at the K-12 level, we are no longer going to fund pathways or CTE programs of study that are not aligned to high-skill, high-wage, high-growth jobs. When they did their analysis, there were a lot of programs that were unaligned that maybe made sense 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but are kind of dead ends right now. And those of you who are in K-12 school systems probably know of such programs. You also know it's not easy to phase out or shut down programs. They made it a goal to do that. This is a heat map they created to show, depending on the color, what percentage of the programs in your school district are, on the continuum of well-aligned to high-skill, high-demand, high-wage versus the red ones, which are fewer than 50% are well-aligned. And they've used this heat map to really encourage evolution of these programs. They also stopped funding unaligned programs. They've now gotten to 100% of what they're funding are aligned to these higher wage, high skilled, high demand fields. And we haven't seen a state make such dramatic change on this score anywhere in the country. They still have a lot of work to do to make sure they can help transition from the lower end programs to higher end, but at least they're putting their foot down at the state and saying it's not okay anymore to continue to support and encourage young people to go into programs that we know are not opening real doors to economic opportunity anymore. I just wanted to flag that. A really difficult issue to deal with in this regard is the non-degree credentials. There are a lot of them out there. So as I said earlier, it's not only about a 4-year or 2-year degree. There are certificates and credentials that are less than an associate's degree that do have value in today's economy. Problem is there are thousands and thousands of non-degree credentials that are available in the US, and it's very difficult as a school system or a higher ed institution to get your arms around which one are high value, which ones are low value. I think probably Indiana has done more work than most on this score, frankly, but we did a study last year and released a report that I'm happy to talk more about at another time that really looked at what state practices are for determining which credentials have value and which don't. And we think there's a long way to go to develop better systems of really working closely with your employer community to understand the value proposition and to unpack which credentials are translating into good jobs and which ones aren't. And once we do that, we need to put our foot down and be steering young people and adults into those high-value pathways and credentials and not the low-value ones. The third leg of the stool after aligning expectations and building quality-aligned pathways is extending navigational supports. I just want to flag 3 things here: financial aid, summer melt, and college match. And these are all laid out in the report. Financial aid, FAFSA. I think those of us who are in the higher education community know the importance of FAFSA, know the complications involved in FAFSA. It's incredible that 90% of those who actually fill out the FAFSA ultimately will enroll in college versus 55% who don't fill out the FAFSA and won't enroll in college. So it's a game changer when you think about it, especially for the populations that sometimes we're most concerned about and have the most to gain from higher ed. But we're hovering in the low 60s nationally for the percentage of high school students who actually fill out the FAFSA. So I'll come back to that in a second. Summer melt, 1/5 of high school graduates who do everything we ask them to do and they get into college, they enroll and they intend to go, will not actually show up the following fall. So that's a challenge. And then we also understand that there's a lot of young people who don't know which institution is best for them and will get them further ahead, and they sometimes undershoot. So in our report, we've taken on all 3 of those issues, but I want to just surface one strategy from a couple states actually, that have made a big difference on FAFSA. So I mentioned low 60s is the national rate. Louisiana and Tennessee last year had a challenge, and it was very public on social media. Their commissioners of education and their higher ed leaders, which state can become the one with the highest completion rate for FAFSA. And they both put policies in place and strategies in place, and everyone was watching them climb, and it turned out that they both ended up around the same place, but Louisiana edged them out by a tiny bit in the upper 70s of completion rates, and they did it through very intentional policies. To graduate high school, you have to take the steps to apply for FAFSA, for example. and some other things where they were shining the light on the importance of it. And lo and behold, rates went up and up and up and up, and now we're going to see how that translates into college enrollment and college success. So it sounds like a simple idea, but they actually, again, they put their foot down as policymakers and said, if this is a difference maker, why aren't we doing more to make sure young people are taking advantage of it? Okay, so let me quickly, I'm excited in a few minutes to invite some of your leaders here in Indiana to come up and have a conversation about what you're doing in the state. I do want to flag that last year, Indiana took a very bold step in looking in the mirror, essentially, and asking what more can we do to solve some of these problems? Where are we doing well? Where do we need to do more? Commissioner Lubbers and your board really decided they wanted to lead and to partner with Superintendent McCormick on the K-12 side and the State Board of K-12 Education and figure out a joint set of strategies to try to close these gaps. They put a post-secondary transition steering committee together, was made up of leaders from both higher education and K-12. ESG was proud to help facilitate that process last year in 2018. A hard look was taken at your data, at the programs and strategies you have going, what's working, what's not, as I said, what you can learn from other states that are doing very ambitious work. And we were really thrilled to see in November and December, both boards adopted a joint set of recommendations for mutually reinforcing strategies and steps that can be taken to advance the ball. Again, they come back to some of these same lenses I was just talking about earlier. We'll get into a little bit more of this on the panel in a few minutes. But we were very pleased to see forward-thinking action taken, and I just want to kind of highlight a few of those things before we transition. So on the aligning expectations, everyone recognized you are doing a fantastic job as a state at shining the light on this transition data. You put out an annual report on college readiness that I think just came out within the last few days or weeks. We've looked all around the country. We haven't seen very many states put together as cogent a set of data and put it out really publicly and talk about it as Indiana does, looking at these student transitions. What the committee and commission felt was important was to take that from a state conversation down to a local conversation and to think really hard about how to facilitate local community-based conversations based on their data, looking through those same lenses so that you at your institutions and in your K-12 school systems can roll up your sleeves and figure out what you can do to advance the ball, not just think about it as a state issue. And I know you're already doing this work, but the existence of very powerful data can sometimes really help catalyze those conversations. So that's what we're seeing, and the data is powerful because if you look at those who take the more advanced curriculum in in Indiana, whether it's the Core 40 or the honors, end up doing much better in terms of college success or college enrollment. But if you look at the bottom right of the screen, you'll see your gaps are still pretty significant. And what's really interesting is your 21st Century Scholars Program that's designed to give students a leg up in that process is a huge difference maker if you could get more young people to take advantage of that. I'll come back to that in 1 second. On the pathways, again, what is your asset? You are the state, I believe, if not one of the top states in terms of advanced course taking and dual enrollment in the country. You see how your rates have gone up and up and up. Very impressive rates of growth. A lot of young people take advantage of those opportunities, and those generally translate into college success. The quality and the rigor of the curriculum a young person takes in high school is probably the #1 factor in college success rates. So that's an asset to build on. Another asset to build on is the work you've been doing in your higher education institutions around rethinking developmental education with co-requisite remediation, and essentially saying we're going to put people into credit-bearing courses when they arrive in our institutions and give them a lot of support, rather than put them over here in a developmental course and hope that they make it over to this side of the house. That's been really game-changing, not only in Indiana but other states in terms of reducing remediation rates, obviously. But you still have a big challenge with mathematics, which is the biggest kind of blocker, if you will, to student success. So the commission last year decided to approve the development of a 12th grade transition course here, the joint commission that I mentioned. And that course was developed with leaders from many of your institutions and school districts just this past year. So there's a brand new 12th grade math course in Indiana that is designed to be like in Tennessee, where if you pass it in 12th grade, if you hadn't been college ready prior to that, you will automatically be able to enter credit-bearing courses in the higher ed institutions successfully. And because of the partnership in developing that course, we're very excited that you might be able to transcend some of these mathematics barriers that often get in the way of young people's success. And then lastly, back to 21st Century Scholars, which is a great asset that you have because it lays out so many of the important steps that young people need to take in high school to ultimately get into and succeed in college. A great roadmap, a great set of supports, as you can see here, laid out by what they typically do in the different grade levels. The challenge you have is that as young people go from 9th grade to all the way to 12th, fewer and fewer of them take advantage of those steps or take those steps. So you're losing a lot of momentum as students go through high school in terms of their kind of participation in that program. So it's a very high impact program. If you can figure out a way to make sure it's taken maximum advantage of by all students throughout their entire high school career, we think you can make a big difference in increasing the college going and success rates. So these were all the issues that were on the table with this this steering committee. Both boards adopted this, as I said, in November, December, and now there's a lot of work, I think, underway to figure out how to make these recommendations real. And I just want to applaud everyone who was part of that work for taking a pretty bold step, and encourage those of you who are hearing about it perhaps for the first time or read about it recently to figure out how you can get involved and bring this down to your institutional and community level work so that you can really create that smooth transition that I mentioned earlier. We're going to be doing this work at the national level. We're going to continue to do it. We'd like to point to Indiana as a leading example. As you can see here on this map, our goal is to go from where we started with just a few states that are doing this really well to every state in the country making this a priority, having a very visible post-secondary transition strategy for young people. And then we really think what's more important is it works its way down and local communities own this and model this behavior and say this is how we're going to do our work going forward for kids and for adults. So really appreciate your time this morning.